Hey gang, this is your video for section 11.1, and chapter 11 talks about cell communication. If you guys have gone through the reading guide already, it states at the beginning of the reading guide, this chapter is not actually the hardest of all the chapters, but it's things that you probably haven't dealt with at all before in any of your previous classes, a whole lot of new terminology, and so it ends up being difficult just because there's so much new terminology that this book, as soon as it introduces a word, it assumes that you know what that word is. So anyway, we're going to kind of buzz through the different sections here. 11.1 is just an overview, and it starts out just by saying, hey, matter of fact, cells communicate with each other, and especially in a larger organism like ourselves, if there's going to be everything working together for the common good of the larger body, there has to be a lot of communication happening between cells so that everything that needs to get done can get done efficiently and at the right timing and all those kinds of things. So there's a lot of that communication happens. So right off the bat, the book is basically just saying, hey, communication does happen. They give this example of yeast cells. This was one of the early studies on how communication happens between different cells. And so they have yeast cells can reproduce sexually, where they transfer genetic material and join genetic material. And so here they have them labeled two different strains of yeast, an A and an alpha yeast. So the A and alpha, and essentially what happens is an A and an alpha, when they are ready to mate, they produce proteins, little molecules that they excrete, and so the alpha yeast cell will produce what they call alpha factors, and the A yeast cell will produce these A factors, and they basically exchange these chemical signals. When they do that, if the A cell receives an alpha factor from the alpha cell, then it'll trigger something inside of the yeast cell to change its shape. The same thing happens with the alpha cell. It starts to change its shape, and if these two things are right beside each other, the cells will actually fuse together. They'll join their cell membranes together and become one cell with the genetic material from both parent cells, and that's actually a huge development in cells to be able to join genetic material. Anyway, but this all happens because they need to tell each other they're there to start. If they're going to mate with each other, there needs to be a way for one to tell the other, hey, I'm here, and that one to say, hey, I'm here too, and then they can actually join each other. So just an example. This chapter then is going to get into the details of, like, what is this signal that is sent from one to the next. And so first we're gonna take a look at different ways cells can communicate with each other before we figure out how the entire signaling pathway works, and how they respond to the signals. But how can they tell each other that they're there, or send signals to each other?